I remember the first day I set foot on the SEAL training ground. The sand was cold beneath my boots, the air sharp with salt and iron, the kind of atmosphere that presses into your lungs and asks if you are worthy to breathe it. Men all around me were already shouting, pushing, competing with one another, each desperate to prove they belonged. I stayed silent. I didn't need to announce myself. I didn't need their approval. My presence alone was a challenge to them, and they knew it. "You don't belong here." My father's voice snapped across the line of recruits. His words were sharper than any blade, and they cut deeper because of who he was. He wasn't just another instructor, not just another man barking orders. He was my father, and in front of everyone, he chose to strip me bare. The others laughed. Some shook their heads, smirks spreading across faces already sunburned and hardened by arrogance. To them, I was a joke, an intruder. To him, I was a mistake that needed to be erased. I did not answer. I refused to give them what they wanted. My anger, my fear, my shame. Instead, I let the silence wrap around me like armor. Silence has power if you know how to wield it. That night, while others collapsed into the sand, groaning and swearing about the day's punishments, I rose before dawn and pushed myself harder than the schedule demanded. Every record they had plastered on the training board, push-ups, sit-ups, distance runs, swimming times, weapon disassembly, I attacked them one by one, and one by one I shattered them. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was fragile. They thought I was temporary. But every broken record carved my presence deeper into that ground until the earth itself seemed to remember my name. Still, they refused to acknowledge me. My father refused to look at me. He would glance past me during drills as though my body was a shadow cast by someone else. His words to others were filled with fire, correction, encouragement. To me, there was only absence. It should have broken me. And maybe it almost did. But there was something greater inside me than the need for his recognition. There was something burning in my blood that whispered, "Survive, outlast, endure." One day during weapons testing, I remember picking up the rifle, my hands steady despite the laughter behind me. Someone muttered, "She'll never hit a single target." Another snorted, "She's just here to fail publicly." I fired, one shot, then another. Each bullet slammed into its mark with precision. The smirks began to fade. My body moved on instinct, rhythm, and focus, sharper than anything I'd felt before. When the test ended, silence hung heavy in the air. I had not only passed, I had destroyed every standing record. They didn't know who I was. Not really, not yet. But that day, something shifted. The silence they once gave me as dismissal began to feel like fear. And then, as if fate had been waiting, the colonel arrived. His boots crunched on the gravel as he scanned the training ground. His eyes passed over the recruits, the instructors, the faces lined up in sweaty defiance. Then his gaze locked on me. The air seemed to freeze. He took a step forward, studying me as though a memory had clawed its way to the surface. The laughter, the sneers, even my father's rigid mask, all of it fell away under the weight of his stare. Finally, his voice cut through the silence. "Ma'am, Falcon." The world stopped. That single word, Falcon, tore through every lie, every attempt to erase me. Suddenly, the identity they tried to bury was alive again, undeniable. The others turned toward me. Confusion etched across their faces. My father stiffened, his jaw clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might crack. He'd spent years trying to erase that name, my name, from history. But here it was, spoken with reverence by a man who outranked them all. And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. They could no longer ignore me. They could no longer pretend I was nothing, because the truth had a voice, and it had just called me Falcon. When the colonel spoke my name, the entire training ground seemed to fall into an unnatural stillness. The men who had laughed at me, mocked me, dismissed me, they suddenly looked at me as if they had never truly seen me before. "Ma'am." "Falcon," the colonel repeated, his tone not one of doubt, but of recognition. His eyes narrowed slightly as though the image before him finally aligned with the legend he had heard, whispered through the ranks. I stood at attention, my face unreadable, though inside my chest my heart beat like a war drum. I had sworn never to reveal my identity. I wanted to be tested as nothing more than a candidate, without privilege, without legacy. But the moment he said that name, there was no putting the truth back in the shadows. My father's face darkened, his lips pressed into a line so tight it was nearly invisible. His voice came low, sharp, dangerous. "Colonel, she does not belong here." The colonel turned to him, his stare carrying the kind of weight that could crush a man's pride in seconds. "General, with respect," he said, "she belongs here more than any of them. You may not want to see it, but I recognize her." Whispers broke out across the recruits. "Falcon?" one of them muttered. "As in, the Falcon?" The name carried its own gravity, its own myth. Years before, during an overseas mission cloaked in secrecy, the codename Falcon had risen like fire across intelligence networks. The details were buried, classified beyond clearance, but the results had spread like legend. A soldier who outmaneuvered entire battalions, dismantled enemy operations with surgical precision, and vanished without ever stepping into the spotlight. They never imagined that soldier was a woman, and now that legend stood among them, silent, breathing the same sharp salt air, carrying the same weight they thought only men could bear. I watched the disbelief spread. Some of them lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others stiffened, unwilling to accept the truth even when it stared them in the face. My father remained frozen, trapped between fury and denial. For me, the revelation was not triumph, not yet. It was exposure. The mask I had worn had shattered, and now the test would not be measured by drills and records, but by endurance against their resentment. The colonel stepped closer to me, his voice lowered so only I could hear, "You've already proven yourself. But they'll fight you harder now, because they fear you. Don't let them break you." I gave the slightest nod. Words were unnecessary. From that day on, the training grew harsher, though not officially. The instructors doubled the weight in my pack. They sent me on longer runs, colder swims, more grueling drills, each punishment disguised as standard procedure, each obstacle designed to force me out. But I endured. I carried the pack until my shoulders bled. I swam until my muscles screamed for air and my lungs burned with salt water. I climbed, crawled, lifted and fought until the body they thought fragile became unshakable steel. And when I finished each test, I stood tall and silent. The silence unnerved them. They wanted to see me beg, to see me stumble, to hear me curse or plead. But silence is not weakness. Silence is defiance. One evening, after hours of punishment, I collapsed into the sand, my body shaking, my vision blurred, every muscle trembling from exhaustion. I closed my eyes, but before darkness claimed me, I felt the ground vibrate near my head. Someone had dropped to one knee beside me. "Still alive?" a voice whispered. I forced my eyes open and saw one of the younger recruits, his face pale, sweat pouring down his brow. He looked terrified, not of me, but of being caught speaking to me. "Yes," I rasped. You shouldn't even be able to move after today," he muttered. "How do you keep going?" I let out a slow breath, because I refused to vanish. He stared at me for a long moment before nodding. Then he rose quickly and walked away, blending into the shadows before anyone noticed. Not all of them despised me. Some were beginning to see. But the more I endured, the more dangerous the hostility became. My father's disapproval sharpened into cruelty. His orders targeted me, his punishments singled me out. The line between training and personal vendetta blurred until I could barely tell where the military ended and his bitterness began. One night, while the others slept, I sat awake, staring at the dark horizon. The ocean crashed in the distance, endless and merciless, and I whispered into the night, words no one else could hear. I am Falcon, and I will not break. The next morning, they tried again to erase me, and the morning after that. But with each attempt, I grew stronger, because erasure is only possible if you agree to be forgotten, and I never would. The weeks that followed were a crucible. Every dawn felt heavier, every command sharper, every task a trap waiting to snap shut. It wasn't enough to keep up with the others anymore. No, I had to survive the weight of their resentment, their need to see me fail. My mere presence was a mirror they hated, one that reflected their doubts, their fragility, their fear that the walls of tradition were crumbling. Sabotage began quietly. The first time, my boots were filled with sand before a forced march. I discovered it after miles of blistering agony. I finished the march, bleeding but silent. The second time, my weapon was tampered with during drills. A single pin loosened, almost invisible, designed to jam the mechanism mid-fire. I caught it before inspection, fixed it, and passed without a word. And then came the worst. The ropes on the climbing wall were cut halfway through. When my body swung into empty air, only instinct saved me. I landed hard, my ribs screaming in protest, but I pushed myself up before they could circle like vultures. No one admitted to it. No one had to. I could feel my father's gaze even when he didn't speak. He wanted me gone. He wanted me erased in failure, erased in humiliation. Perhaps he thought he was protecting the legacy of the men before me, or perhaps he simply couldn't accept that his daughter might succeed where others had failed. But every attempt to break me forged something stronger inside. And then something changed. During a night raid simulation, we were divided into teams. My group was scattered in the darkness, ambushed by the others. I fought through the chaos, my vision blurred by smoke and sand. When the last flare lit the sky, I was the only one left standing, my weapon leveled, my breath steady. The colonel's voice cut through the silence. Falcon. This time it wasn't a question. It was a declaration. From that moment, the whispers turned into respect, reluctant but real. Some still resented me, but others began to watch me differently. They began to measure themselves against me, not in bitterness, but in challenge. And a strange thing happened. The harder they pushed me, the more I carried them with me. One evening during an endurance march, one of the recruits collapsed from dehydration. The instructors ordered us to move on, but I stayed. I pulled him to his feet, slung his arm over my shoulder, and carried him mile after mile until we reached the end. When I set him down, gasping for air, one of the men muttered under his breath, "Falcon carried him." Falcon carried all of us. The name was no longer just a whisper of legend. It became my shield, my blade, my burden. But my father refused to bend. After a grueling obstacle course, he cornered me in the shadows. His face was stone, his eyes cold as steel. "You shame me," he hissed. I stood tall, my chest heaving, my throat raw. "No, father, I shame only your pride." His hand twitched at his side, as though he wanted to strike me but couldn't. Not here, not now. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath hot with fury. "If you think that name will protect you, you're mistaken. Falcon or not, I'll see you broken before I let you stand beside me." He walked away, leaving the words hanging like poison in the night. For the first time, doubt clawed at me. Was I fighting my father, or the entire weight of history? Was this battle truly winnable? Or was I carving scars into myself for a victory that could never exist? But then I remembered the eyes of the men I had carried, the whispers of respect that had begun to grow. I remembered the colonel's recognition, the weight of his words, and I knew. The battle was not for my father's approval. It was for every silent woman erased, every name crossed out of history, every story buried under the weight of tradition. I was not here for him. I was here for me, and so I endured. Dawn after dawn, I rose. Drill after drill, I fought. Sabotage after sabotage, I survived, until my body no longer felt like flesh, but like fire, burning, unyielding, eternal. The final test loomed, the one they said broke more soldiers than any other. The ocean awaited, endless and merciless. And I knew when I stepped into those waves, it would not just be for a place in the program, it would be for the right to exist. And I would not vanish. The final trial was whispered about like a ghost story. Recruits spoke of it in fragments, never with certainty, only with fear. They called it the drowning. We stood at the shore before sunrise, the ocean a vast black expanse stretching to infinity. The waves crashed like artillery, relentless and merciless, as if the sea itself wanted us gone. The air was cold, sharp enough to cut through bone. The instructors barked orders, their voices carried away by the wind. We were to swim into the dark waters, weighted down, tested not by time, but by endurance. No markers, no path, just survival against the tide, until only the strongest returned. Men had died here before. That much I knew. I stepped into the water, each wave slamming into me with a force that tried to drive me back. Salt stung my eyes, filled my throat, but I pressed forward. The cold bit into me, stealing heat with every stroke, but I swam harder. Around me, I heard the gasps, the cries, the splashes of those already faltering. Some turned back. Others disappeared beneath the surface. But I did not stop. The ocean was not my enemy. It was my crucible. Every wave that struck me carried the weight of my father's rejection. Every current that pulled me down carried the silence of those who had tried to erase me. And with each surge, I rose again. I swam until the horizon blurred, until the stars above seemed to spin, until my body screamed for surrender. My limbs felt like lead, my chest like fire. I could hear the whispers of weakness, the echoes of every voice that told me I did not belong. And then I screamed into the storm, not with my throat, but with every fiber of my being. I will not vanish. The words were swallowed by the waves, but I felt them vibrate inside me, anchoring me to existence. Somehow I reached the distant marker, a buoy barely visible in the storm. I touched it, slammed my hand against it as though striking an enemy, then turned back toward the shore. The return was worse. Every stroke threatened to pull me under. My vision dimmed, my breath ragged, but I clawed forward inch by inch until the sand finally met my hands. I collapsed onto the shore, coughing, spitting salt water, my chest heaving. For a moment, the world was only darkness and sound, the thunder of waves, the roar of blood in my ears, and then silence. When I forced my eyes open, they were all there. The colonel stood at the edge of the sand, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Around him, the recruits, battered, shivering, some broken, some defeated, stared at me. But it was not their faces that held me still. It was my father's. He stood apart, his uniform pristine, his posture rigid. For once his mask cracked. In his eyes there was no pride, but neither was there denial. There was only something raw, something he had fought to bury for too long, recognition. The colonel stepped forward, his boots sinking into the wet sand. He looked down at me, then extended his hand. "Rise, Falcon." My body trembled, but I forced myself to stand, dripping, shaking, yet unbroken. When I stood before him, the colonel's voice carried across the shore, sharp and undeniable. "This is not just a recruit. This is the Falcon, and from this day forward, she is one of us." The words struck like thunder. Some of the men bowed their heads, others nodded slowly, and a few even raised their fists in silent salute. My father said nothing. He turned away, his jaw tight, his silence heavier than any words he could have spoken. But as he walked, I saw his shoulders falter just slightly, a crack in the armor. I didn't need his approval anymore, because I had carved my place into the world with my own blood, my own breath, my own defiance. That night, as the campfire burned and the recruits sat in quiet reflection, one of them turned to me. His voice was soft, reverent, as though afraid to disturb the night. "Falcon carried us all," he whispered. And in the flicker of firelight, I finally allowed myself to close my eyes, not in weakness, but in triumph. I had not been erased. I had not been forgotten. I was Falcon, and my story would never vanish.